Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter XL air helper springs here on our 2021 GMC Sierra 2500. So in order to see how much of a difference our airbags can make, we're going to be taking some measurements here of the stock suspension unloaded so we can show you how much it changed once we put some weight in the bed and add our airbags. So keep in mind, these measurements we're just using as a reference point. You don't need to worry about your measurements matching these measurements or your measurements being different. But at the rear here, we're going to measure from the ground to the top inside edge of the wheel well, the bottom edge rather. And at the rear here, we're looking at about 42 inches. Now let's head up to the front of the truck and measure the same thing. So now we're up here at the front of the truck. Go ahead and take that same measurement. And we're looking at about 41 inches. So it looks like the factory rake on this particular model here is going to be about 1 inch. Now let's go ahead and throw some weight in our truck bed here so we can see how our measurements change. So now we got some weight in our truck bed here. Just as a point of reference again, we got about 1,500 pounds or so. So now we're going to go ahead and retake our measurements. At the rear here, we're looking at about 40 inches, therefore we dropped about 2 inches here in the rear. Now let's head up to the front of the truck and take our same measurement there. So now if we measure the same in the front here, we're looking at about 41.5 inches, therefore the front of our truck came up about a ½ inch. Now let's take our truck out on the test course here so we can show you how it performs. So now let's head over to our test bump course here. Get over these first couple bumps here. I do notice the truck, the back end of it, is definitely bucking around a little bit. We're getting a lot more bounce than normal. Now we're over here at our slalom course here. Let's get up to speed, do some evasive maneuvers. So when we hit those sharp corners there, we're definitely getting some body roll here, and that's basically our truck rocking back and forth on the chassis. So a little bit of a decrease in overall stability, and the steering, I would say, is not quite as responsive. So now with our airbags installed, pressurized, and our weight back in the truck bed here, we can retake our measurements. So at the rear here, we are back to our 42-inch factory ride height. So now let's go ahead and take that same measurement at the front. And then at the front here, we're right back at 41 inches from the bottom of the fender here. So again, back to the factory ride height at the front as well. Now let's take it back on our test course here so we can see if we notice a difference. So now we're over here at our test bump course. So it definitely feels a little bit stiffer, but there's not nearly as much bouncing around as we did before. So now we're back over at our slalom course here. Get up to speed, make some evasive maneuvers. And right away, we do notice the steering is definitely a lot more touchy than it was before, and we don't have nearly as much body roll. Therefore, we feel a little bit more planted to the road here. We don't have that rocking back and forth feeling we did earlier. So adding air helper springs to your truck here, it's going to be an excellent option if you find yourself doing a lot of heavy hauling or heavy duty towing. Now, the reason adding suspension enhancements such as airbags is important is because when we're hauling those heavy loads or we have a heavy trailer hooked up, our truck is going to sag to the rear here. We're going to be offsetting the factory rake. Now, by doing this, your truck's not only going to look a little funny, it's also going to cause some performance issues, which we'll go over now. So one of the minor things that not a lot of people think about until they get out on the road and they're driving, especially at night, is that our headlight aim is going to be off. So since we've added a lot of weight to the rear of the truck, the front of the truck is actually going to be pointed up. Therefore, we're not going to get a great visibility of the road and what's ahead. We're also going to be blinding other motorists. So something else you're going to notice if you find yourself to be towing for extended periods of time or hauling frequently is improper tire wear. So the reason we're going to get improper tire wear from sag/squat is because the factory camber adjustments are going to be set for the factory rake. Therefore, when we add that weight to the rear of the truck and it lifts the front of the truck, our tires are actually going to change cambers. therefore resulting in improper tire wear. So one of the more serious things that you're going to experience in regards to a lack of performance from excessive sag/squat, and that's going to be the braking. Now, a lot of people don't actually realize how big of an effect the sag/squat has on our truck in regards to that braking. So the braking bias for most vehicles on the road today is going to be 60-40. Therefore, the majority of our braking force is coming from the front axle. So when we take weight off that front axle, we're greatly going to reduce our stopping power, not allowing us to come to a smooth and effective stop as we would normally. So in regards to suspension enhancements, such as our airbags that we're going to be showing you guys and going over, these aren't the only option for trucks. They are, however, in my mind, the best options. Some of the other ones you may be familiar with are Timbrens and Sumo springs, and those actually replace the factory jounce bumper. But the problem we have with those is, number one, they're not adjustable, and number two, we're still going to experience some sag/squat before those actually engage. Whereas with our airbags, we can set those up to engage right away, and they're obviously adjustable, so we can get the perfect mix between support and comfort for any given load we may have. So one thing I would like to point out is that we do actually need an external air compressor in order to fill our airbags before each trip. Now, chances are you could just head to the gas station and use their air there. It's usually a pretty convenient solution for most. But if you want something on board that you can control inside the cab, you're going to want to look into an onboard air compressor system. And we have plenty of great options to choose from here at eTrailer. So there's actually two different versions of these airbags here. There's the standard duty model rated at 5,000 pounds, and there's the XL model rated at 7,500 pounds. Now, both of those are going to be more than enough for the payload capacity of our truck here, so we shouldn't have to worry about exceeding those ratings. However, the XL version, which is what we're going to be going over today, this is going to be geared more towards those more frequent towing. If you have a car hauler trailer, you're towing across the country, or you have your camper and you're towing every weekend. The XL version is definitely going to be suited for those more frequent applications. So in regards to installation, I know the airbag kits can kind of seem intimidating at first, especially when you open up the box and see all the parts. But I will say the majority of these installations, they go pretty smooth. Everything is laid out for you, the instructions. There's no modifying to the vehicle. So as long as you give yourself some time, have adequate tools, you guys should have no problem at all installing these airbags by yourselves at home without a lift. So to start our installation off, we're obviously going to be coming underneath the rear of the vehicle here. Now, you can remove the spare tire if you want to. It's not required, but it will give you a little bit more room to work. But now we're going to go ahead and remove the jounce springs, the factory jounce springs. So here's what they look like. In order to remove them, they're just held in place with the crimps around the metal cups. So we're going to take a lubricant here. We're just going to spray around that edge. Try to get that lubricant in between the two materials there. And then what we can do is we can take a pry bar here. We'll do our best to work it between the cup and the spring, and we'll just pry it out of place. Just like that. So the next thing we're going to be doing, we're going to be removing the ABS line bracket, which is attached to the jounce spring striker plate. So we're going to take a 13mm socket and remove that bolt right there. And then we're going to lift this bracket out and away from the jounce spring striker plate. So next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing the two wire clips here attached to that metal bracket. So I'm going to take a trim panel tool. I'm going to remove this outer one here. This just pulls straight out like so. And then for this larger loom here, we actually have some tabs on the top we're going to have to depress. And then we should be able to pull/push down to release it from the bracket. Just like that. Next, we're going to start some assembly here for one of our airbag brackets. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to be again assembling our airbag assembly here. So we're going to be working on the driver's side first. We're going to take our airbag here. We're going to face the top side up towards us. The top side has the two mounting holes and then the inflation port hole. So we're going to take our inflation valve here. We're going to simply thread it in to that inflation port. So they are kind of hard to get started, but we're just going to go finger tight for now, and then 1.5 turns here with a 1/2 inch wrench. And then what I always like to do is I like to test the assembly out as soon as we get the air fitting installed outside the vehicle. That way, if we have any leaks, we can address it now. So in order to test it, what you guys could do is you could go ahead and cut the airline you guys have in half and just plug one end into the fitting here, and then the other one is going to have your inflation valve. We have a little tool in the shop we use here, which is basically going to mimic the same thing I instructed you guys to do. So we're just going to install that in there, and now we're going to put some air in there, just enough so we can test it all out. Now we're going to take a soapy water solution here. I'm just going to spray everything down to make sure there aren't any leaks. So if we don't have any rapid forming bubbles, that indicates that it's a nice and tight seal, and now we can proceed with our installation. If you did have any leaks, you'd want to loosen this fitting, retighten it, possibly apply some more thread tape or thread sealer. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our roll plates here. We're going to go ahead and place that over the air spring and over the fitting like so. We want to make sure the rounded edges on the roll plate are facing down towards the bottom of the air spring. Now we're going to take one of our upper brackets here. So you can tell the upper bracket has a little notch there. That's going to go around the inflation valve. You can see this side is flat. So we're going to go ahead and place that over like so. Now we do need to make sure that we have the correct upper brackets because there's 2 of them and they're not the same. So basically what we do is the inflation port is going to be facing the inside, and we want the 3-hole bracket here, the top flange, needs to be facing the rear of the truck towards the bumper. So once we have the correct upper spring, or the upper bracket rather, we have it positioned correctly on the air spring, we can go ahead and attach it using the 2 Allen head fasteners that come in your kit here. We're going to be using a 7/32 inch Allen key in order to tighten these down. So I'm just going to thread them in there by hand. You're going to be lining up the roll plate with the upper bracket into the threads of the air spring. So once we get each side started hand tight, we can come back with our torque wrench and torque it to the specifications in our instructions. Now that we have the upper bracket installed, I'm going to flip this upside down and install the lower one. So we again need to place a roll plate over the air spring, and then we need to attach our lower bracket. This is what our lower bracket looks like. The angled portion here is going to be facing the airline fitting. So we have the airline fitting on this side of our air spring, so we're going to flip this over, the angled portion facing that way. So the next thing we need to do is install the air spring here to the lower bracket. If you're going to notice, we have a couple different sets of holes. Now, I'll admit this is kind of confusing to explain, especially if you're not working on the same side as us or you don't have the air spring assembly positioned like this. So my best advice is to simply follow the instructions so you make sure you're using the correct set of holes. They will be different for each side. So we'll set our lower bracket into position, making sure we're using the correct set of holes, and then we can secure it to the air spring. Now before I tighten these down, I am going to sort of just roughly hold the air spring assembly up to the vehicle so I can make sure I'm in the correct holes once again, because it is kind of tricky. And once we've verified it's correct, we'll torque these 2 down as well. So we're ready to set our air spring assembly on the vehicle here. In order to do that, I find it a little bit easier to compress the air spring here. So in order to do that, if you remember our little tool from earlier, you can just use your half length of the hose that you cut from your kit here And basically, we're just going to press down on the airbag here to let all the air escape, and then we're essentially just plugging it so it stays in this compressed form and it's easier to maneuver up on the vehicle. Now, when we're setting this on, it's going to be a little bit harder on the driver's side if we didn't take down the spare tire. If we did take down the spare tire, it's probably going to be a little bit easier. This is what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about removing the spare tire, that some things are going to be a little bit easier, some things are going to be a little bit harder depending on whether or not we remove that. So let's go ahead and get it into position now. So as you can see, we got it into position now. I'm going to go ahead and slide it closer to the leaf spring and then pull down here so it's sitting flush on top of the striker plate. Now, I will say the passenger side is actually a little bit easier. This side will be a lot easier if you remove the spare tire, but as you can see, we can still get it into place with our spare tire in position. And now, once we get our air spring assembly into position, we can reinstall our brake line bracket here. So we're actually going to be using the hardware that comes in your kit here, not the factory hardware. It's this little M8 bolt along with this small flat washer. So there's going to be a threaded hole into the plate there, along with an empty hole there to allow the tab to line up. And we'll simply start threading it on, and then we'll tighten it down with a 13mm socket. So it is kind of difficult because the brake line is tensioning the bracket and kind of torquing it. So you want to make sure you get that bolt started correctly before you go tightening it down so you don't strip it. That should be good. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our ABS line bracket here that comes in your kit. So you want to make sure that the collar here is going to be facing up. You got your tab here to attach the ABS line. You're going to click it into the bottom of there, and you'll simply place it up onto the bracket there. Now we'll attach the two to one another using our 3/8 carriage bolt. Align it with that slot there, and then thread on one of your flange nuts. So we're going to thread this all the way up there until the two brackets are sandwiched together. We're not, however, tightening this nut at this time. We're going to get a few other things into position first. So now that we have one of our carriage bolts in place, we're going to take one of our axle strap brackets here, place it through the hole on the bottom, and then secure it with a flange nut. And then on the front side of this lower bracket, we're going to have another one of those square slots. We're going to install another carriage bolt through and then secure it to the bottom of the axle strap with another flange nut. So I'm going to get this one started here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pretty much center this bracket here in between the mount for our shocks and the strap here, the bracket rather, for our U-bolts. So we're going to center this bracket here, and then we're going to evenly tighten down both of these flange nuts with a 9/16 inch socket, and then torque them to the specifications in your instructions. And now once we have both of these torqued down, we can go ahead and snug up our other flange nut here up top. Now we're going to take this other smaller wire loom earlier with that push fastener, and just reattach that to the bracket just like so. And that pretty much finishes everything up here for the bottom. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove the plug from our air spring assembly and allow it to expand. Just like that. And now, working on the driver's side here, if we look directly above the flange here, there's going to be a nice wire loom here, a big harness attached to the frame rail. So we're going to take our pry tool here, we're going to pry that out just like so. So next we need to grab a couple bits of hardware from your kit here. We're going to be grabbing this sort of half U-bolt. This is what it looks like. And then our long hex bolt along with a flat washer. So basically how this works is we're going to be basically wrapping this around the frame like so, and then we're going to be securing it to the two flanges on our upper bracket with some flange nuts at the bottom. But we don't have enough space in order to use a traditional U-bolt, so we're going to have to place this up there sort of part way, insert our bolt from the back side, rotate it down like so. So we'll give you a little bit closer look of that on the vehicle here next. So now we're going to take this, set it into position like so. So we need to come inside the wiring harness that we just peeled back from the frame. But before we rotate it down, we're going to take our hex bolt here and come along to the outside of the frame and insert that first. So we're on the outside of the frame here. We're going to place our hex bolt through just like so. And then we can come up and over like so, and then line up the holes there on the top flange of our upper bracket. So with the U-bolt into position now, we'll go ahead and just loosely thread on our flange nuts at the bottom here. So you probably noticed that the release handle there, you're not going to have that. That's this right here. This is for a gooseneck hitch that we have installed aftermarket on this truck here. So chances are you're not going to have that in the way. It's going to make things a little bit easier. If you do have a gooseneck hitch there with the handle, just be mindful of that when you're installing the U-bolt. So next we're going to come on the outside of the frame here. We're going to grab our traditional U-bolt here. We're simply going to be placing this around the outside of the jout spring cup at the top there, and then pushing it into position through the holes on the other side of our upper bracket. Now I will say sometimes this is a rather tight fit and you may need a hammer to tap it into place. Now that we have the U-bolt nice and tight around the jout spring cup, we'll come back on the inside there and secure it to our upper bracket with the two flange nuts. So now we're going to take one of our airline halves that we used earlier. We're going to place it into the push connect fitting on the top of our air spring. So the way those fittings work is we just simply press the line into the fitting and then pull out to lock it in place. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to push the air fitting so it's facing the front of the vehicle. And then I'm going to come up and over this bracket here. And I'm going to essentially run our airline to the rear back by the bumper, securing it along the way. We're going to go ahead and do that now, and then we'll show you the path we took. So we have our airline secured here and running back to our bumper. As you can see, we have it sort of first started going towards the front of the vehicle. You want to make sure you give yourself plenty of slack here to allow the suspension to travel up and down. And then we have it zip tied in a couple places to the brake lines. Gonna work our way back here, securing it to the existing wiring harness on the frame, and then up and over the cross member that holds our spare tire till we come out right here. Now that we have this into position, we're going to go ahead and fill our system up, put about 10 pounds in there, and then we can tighten and torque the bolts for our upper bracket. We're going to start with our U-bolt that attaches to the top of the frame. So we'll take a 9/16 inch socket. We're just going to rotate back and forth, slowly tightening these nuts down. For the outside one here, you are going to need to place an open-ended box wrench up on the top of the bolt head there. So just work our way back and forth, snugging them up, and then we'll bring our torque wrench here and torque them to the final specifications. So now we're going to do that same thing here for the U-bolt that wraps around the jout spring cup. Now we'll just simply repeat those same steps over on the other side of the vehicle. So the only thing that's really different over on the passenger side here is that we have a heat shield which attaches to our exhaust here with two band clamps. So we need to place that directly where our airbag is going to be mounted because we don't want the heat from the exhaust here damaging our bag. So again, we just have two band clamps attaching this heat shield here to our exhaust. You'll want to bend the bracket here a little bit too. We don't want it touching the exhaust. We want it to, however, conform to the outside shape of it so it has the best fit on the vehicle here and it's not interfering with any of our brackets. So now all that's left here is to mount both of our inflation valves and then we can test everything out. So now we went ahead and mounted up our inflation valves here. So we actually used a bracket designed for this, but it's actually for the Firestone kit. It doesn't come with yours. It just makes for a no drill installation, but you can still install this using the components that come in your kit. All you need to do is find a place to drill a couple holes to mount these valves here. So a lot of people will actually drill a couple holes into the license plate area up here, maybe one on either side, or you can put them both sort of over here. Just wherever you have room, make sure you check behind the material here before you drill into it so we don't drill into any wires. But you'd essentially just drill a couple holes there and then use the provided hardware to secure them. Next thing we're going to be doing, however, is we're going to go ahead and remove the caps here so we can fill up our system and check for leaks. And now all that's left to do is to go ahead and spray down all of our fittings and lines with a soapy water solution so we can check for leaks. Now granted, we already tested the bags earlier, so we shouldn't have too much more to check. But again, we're just looking for those rapid forming bubbles, which would indicate a leak. And in which case, we'd need to remove the line from the fitting, recut it, or retighten the fitting. And that's going to do it today for our look and installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter XL air helper springs here on our 2021 GMC Sierra 2500.